Picture this. It's a Tuesday morning. You're at a gas station. You swipe your card. The number on the pump feels a little higher than last week. You figure it's just one of those things. You drive off. What you don't know, what nobody on cable news is bothering to explain, is that the price you just paid has a direct, traceable line to a military conflict 10,000 miles away. One you didn't vote for, one you might not even be following. And here's the uncomfortable part. That number at the pump, that's the cheap version of what's coming. Wars cost money. Obvious, right? Everybody knows that. But here's what most people don't know. The bill for a modern war almost never arrives while the war is happening. It arrives later, sometimes years later, sometimes decades. And it doesn't arrive in the mail. It doesn't show up as a line item on your tax return. It shows up quietly, in the background, in your grocery bill, in your mortgage rate, in the purchasing power of the dollars sitting in your savings account. This is the story of how wars get paid for. Not by governments, not by defense contractors, by you and me and everyone who holds American dollars. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to see a number that will reframe every headline you read about this conflict for the rest of your life. Let's put a frame around where we are. The United States is currently providing direct military assistance, economic aid, and intelligence support across at least 2 active conflict zones simultaneously. That's not an opinion. That's the Congressional Budget Office's words, not mine. Since 2022, Congress has authorized over $215 billion in supplemental funding packages tied directly to foreign military and humanitarian assistance. That's separate from the base defense budget, which just crossed $900 billion for the first time in American history. Read that again. $900 billion per year for defense alone, before the wars. Now add the supplemental packages, add the interest on the debt used to fund them, add the secondary economic disruptions, the supply chain shocks, the energy market volatility, the inflation that central banks then have to fight with interest rate hikes that slow down your ability to buy a house or start a business. You start to see that the actual price tag of a modern American war is not what gets announced in a press briefing. The announced number is the opening bid. The real number is hidden in macroeconomics, and it compounds over time like a loan you forgot you took out. Here's the framework we're going to use today. There are 4 layers to the cost of any major American military engagement. Most people only ever hear about the first one. We're going to go through all 4. Layer 1, the direct appropriations, the money Congress votes to spend, the number you see in the news. Layer 2, the economic distortion, what happens to markets, commodities, and inflation when war spending enters the system. Layer 3, the long-tail obligations, veterans care, reconstruction, interest payments, the costs that keep accruing long after the guns go quiet. Layer 4, the geopolitical price, what America gives up strategically, in credibility, in alliances, in global monetary dominance, that doesn't show up in any spreadsheet but shapes the next 50 years. Most war coverage lives entirely in Layer 1. We're gonna live in all 4. Okay, Layer 1, the direct appropriations, the money Congress votes to spend. Let's use a number that's grounded in what's publicly verifiable as of early 2025. The United States has committed, through various supplemental funding packages, over $200 billion specifically related to the Ukraine conflict since February 2022. When you add parallel commitments in the Middle East theater, defense repositioning, carrier group deployments, munitions drawdowns, that number climbs past $300 billion when you factor in operational military costs. $300 billion. You want to know what it feels like at the individual level? There are about 340 million people in the United States. Roughly 131 million of them are taxpayers. $300 billion divided by 131 taxpayers is about $2,300 per taxpayer. That's not a metaphor, that's the math. Now, you didn't write a check for $2,000. The government borrowed that money. It issued treasury bonds. Investors, foreign governments, and the Federal Reserve bought bought those bonds, and the government promised to pay them back with interest. Here's where it gets interesting. The United States currently carries a national debt of approximately $34 to $35 trillion, depending on the week you check. The annual interest payment on that debt just crossed $1 trillion for the first time in history. $1 trillion per year, just in interest. That's more than the entire defense budget was a decade ago. So when Congress votes to spend $200 billion on foreign military aid, they are not spending money they have. They are adding $200 billion to a credit card that's already charging $1 trillion a year in interest. And the interest rate on new debt is higher than it's been in 20 years because the Federal Reserve raised rates to fight inflation that was partly caused by, you guessed it, prior deficit spending. This is a loop, and we are inside it. Now we leave the congressional chamber and go somewhere more complicated, the actual economy. When a government spends massively during wartime, it injects an enormous amount of new money into specific sectors: defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, logistics companies, energy suppliers, the firms that make artillery shells and the firms that ship them. In 2022 and 2023, the United States drew down its own munitions stockpiles faster than it could replenish them. The domestic defense industrial base, which had been running lean for 30 years after the Cold War, simply wasn't built for this pace, so we had to spend and spend fast to rebuild that base. That's actually good for some American workers. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, these companies hired, their stocks went up, their suppliers got busy. But here's the irony that the financial press doesn't say loudly enough. The same war spending that boosted defense sector profits also contributed to the broader inflationary wave of 2022 and 2023, a wave that the Federal Reserve then fought with interest rate hikes that slowed down your ability to buy a house or start a business. So the sequence looks like this. War spending adds money to the economy. That money, stacked on top of pandemic stimulus, drives inflation. The Fed raises rates to kill inflation. Higher rates make your mortgage, your car loan, and your credit card more expensive. Your purchasing power shrinks. Meanwhile, the defense contractor CEO collected a $12 million bonus. This is not a conspiracy. It's just how the plumbing works. And energy is the accelerant in all of it. Russia was, and in many ways still is, one of the world's largest exporters of oil and natural gas. Sanctions on Russian energy didn't just hurt Russia. They disrupted global supply chains and pushed oil prices to over $120 a barrel in mid-2022. The average American household spent roughly $900 more in energy in 2022 than in 2021, according to the U.S. Energy Administration. That's $900 that didn't go to savings, or groceries, or college tuition. It went to energy companies that posted record profits while ordinary Americans paid the spread. You want to talk about transfer of wealth? There it is. Here's the part that almost nobody talks about: the costs that don't exist yet. The bill from a war that won't show up for 20 years. Let's use a historical anchor, because history is the only honest forecaster here. The total cost of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, as estimated by the Watson Institute at Brown University, is not the $2 trillion Congress appropriated. It's between $8 and $9 trillion when you include projected lifetime care for veterans, disability payments, interest on war debt, and ongoing intelligence and security infrastructure that those wars created and still runs today. The wars technically ended. The spending did not. America's veteran population is 18 million people. Healthcare for veterans is not free. It's paid by the Department of Veterans Affairs, which operates on an annual budget of about $300 billion. And which faces a structural backlog of mental health and disability claims that stretches years into the future. Now think about what active deployments in new territories mean for that number 10 or 20 years from now. Every service member who serves in a combat-adjacent role and comes home with a traumatic brain injury, with PTSD, with chronic pain, the care for that person is a 50-year obligation, not a 2-year appropriations bill. The Pentagon doesn't advertise this math. Congress doesn't hold hearings about the 2045 VA budget implications of the 2024 deployment schedule, but the actuaries know. The bean counters at the Office of Management and Budget know, and it's not pretty. There's also Reconstruction. The United States has a decades-long pattern of helping break things and then helping pay to fix them.
In Ukraine alone, the World Bank has estimated reconstruction costs at over $500 billion. Who pays for that? largely the international community, which in practical terms means the countries with the largest checkbooks, most of which use dollars as their reserve currency, which loops us back to American monetary dominance and what it costs to maintain it. Speaking of which, let me give you the number I promised at the beginning. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, along with Harvard's Linda Bilmes, famously calculated that the true cost of the Iraq War, including all downstream obligations, was $3 trillion, not the original $100 billion estimate the Bush administration offered in 2002. That's a 30-fold underestimate. Apply a similar multiplier to current commitments, using conservative assumptions about veteran care, debt service, and economic distortion. You get to a figure that is not $200 billion, not $300 billion, but somewhere in the range of $1 to $2 trillion in total economic impact on the United States over the next 20 years. $1 to $2 trillion. For a war that most Americans can't find on a map without help. Divided across 131 million taxpayers, that's $7,000 to $15,000 per taxpayer over time in direct and indirect costs. Not all at once, not on a bill. Quietly. In your mortgage rate, in the price of eggs, in the Social Security Trust Fund that got a little less attention because Congress was busy writing emergency appropriations, in the infrastructure bill that got scaled back, in the climate spending that got traded away in a budget negotiation to secure the next military package. This is the opportunity cost argument, and it's the one that serious economists make when the cameras aren't rolling. Every dollar borrowed at 5% interest to fund a foreign military commitment is a dollar that could have been borrowed, or not borrowed at all for something else, or nothing, just not owed.
Rome didn't fall because it ran out of legions. It fell, among other reasons, because it ran out of the money to pay them. The next time you see a headline about a foreign aid package, or a defense supplemental bill, or an emergency authorization, I want you to ask one question before you form an opinion. Not, is this the right thing to do? Ask, what's the real number? Not the announced one, the real one. Because someone's going to pay it. And I'll give you one guess, who.
If this video helped you, like, subscribe, and comment.